Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Divorce and Separation Coach podcast. This week, we're talking about a very heated topic, parental alienation. And to talk about this, I've invited Joanna Toch. Joanna is the founder of Family Law Cafe, where they provide legal, emotional, and practical support all in one place. So Joanna and her team make sure that their clients get the best outcome from their family law matters by leveraging their secure online case space on phone, tablet, and laptop. Joanna herself has over 30 years experience as a family barrister. Joanna herself has over 30 years experience as a family law barrister, and she's got extensive knowledge in financial remedies, cohabitation disputes, and children cases. Thank you for joining me, Joanna. It's great to see you.
No, thank you for asking me to do this. I'm excited.
So it's a very controversial topic, to say the least. The word parental, or the expression parental alienation, is used a lot and sometimes criticized. Could we start maybe by defining what parental alienation means and when it's used?
Yeah. So recently, the Family Justice Council issued some guidance about responding, and in their guidance they took a moment to make a couple of points. And the first thing that they said they wanted to make very clear is the concept of parental alienation syndrome as a psychological syndrome is not accepted. It's pseudoscience. You can't be saying someone has, that there is a syndrome. And there are some people who are saying this, but the courts, I want to be very clear and honest with people. If you go into court and say, there's the parental alienation, or even use that term, or parental alienation syndrome, the court is going to say we do not accept that. But what the court does look at and accept are allegations of alienating behaviour. So it's a different term. And that's, if you are of the view that there has been alienating behaviour, that's really the term you should use. Okay. And so in their report, the Family Justice Council said that there are three necessary elements for a finding of alienating behaviours. Alienating behaviours with an S on the end, if I haven't made that clear. They quoted the president of the family division, Lord Macfarlane, because he presided over an appeal where parental alienating behaviours had been found by a judge at a fact finding. And what he was dealing with was complaints by the mother who the court had found that she had engaged in these behaviours and had transferred the residence of the children to the father. The children were living with their father. And the mother wanted to reopen the case. And she said, we had this expert. They didn't have proper qualifications. It wasn't correct. Lord Macfarlane looked at all of that and just rejected it all. But what he did accept was that it wasn't a syndrome, and that he was very clear about this. He said, this is a question of fact for the court. Has a mother or a father or caregiver engaged in alienating behaviours? And they're questions of fact. So that's a really, really important point. Factually, have there been things that have been done that have caused a child to become, and there's some terms here, there's new terminology, and I want people to understand the terminology that's really used by the court. Are there behaviours by the child of reluctance, resistance, or refusal to contact? So that's your first point of call. Because if the child is coming to contact, because I see people waving the flag of parental alienation in court, and my first point is, but the child is happily coming to contact with you. So obviously that isn't happening. So firstly, is the child reluctant, resistant, or is the child refusing to come to contact? You've got to find that. And then you need, in addition, the next thing you've got to look at, that it's not consequent on other factors. And one of the factors is called appropriate justified rejection. This is a new term. There's all these acronyms. I'm not even sure if they're helpful in my personal view. So it's called AJR. And they define that as when a child, for good reason, is not going to contact. So I've been in cases where a child was hit in the face by her father. She then didn't want to see him. He didn't apologise. He actually didn't tell anyone. And the mother only found out after the child didn't want to go with her brother. And that was a really difficult case. It went on for a long time. The father was saying the mother was alienating the child. And I knew she was really tearing her hair out. She wanted her daughter to go. But really what happened there was, when I look back, the child was reacting not just to being slapped in the face, which was a shock, I think, to her. Anything had happened like that. It was inappropriate discipline. He just lost it. And Kafka said, look, sometimes parents do. And it was an overreaction by her. I think that the problem was he had never apologised. It took about a year, and it was only in the process of proceedings. I think she just felt she wasn't believed. And a lot of children, that's a factor. People maybe don't. They need to open their minds about that. So, has there been significant domestic violence that a child has seen, let's say, their father being hit by their mother or horrible domestic violence of some kind, and the child is rejecting and it's appropriate because there has been domestic abuse, for example.
Yeah, because then it's not the other parent interfering. It's really the child making up their mind that they don't want. They just don't want to see their other parent because they're upset with their behaviour.
Exactly. So that's called appropriate justified rejection.
Okay.
And then you've got another factor, and this is something that I think is really significant, and people, this is a difficult one. You also have AAA. Now, this is attachment, affinity, and alignment. Okay. So children may not want to see a parent because of attachment issues that they may, and it is perhaps inappropriate, but they may feel that their attachment, let's say, to their mother might be damaged if they were seen to be spending a lot of time with their father, and they have an insecure attachment. So it's attachment is people who deal with child matters will know that's a term for how attached a child is to a parent. These things go back to childhood. People can suffer if there's a lack of attachment to a parent. So is it an attachment issue? Is there an affinity with one parent? The child is just very close to one parent and feels very disloyal. And is there alignment? And I think alignment's huge because children do align. They see, parents, you should know your children are always watching. They're probably seeing so much more than you see because we're very busy as adults. Child in their little world, they're just watching everything. And have they become aligned with one parent? I mean, I had a case where, in fact, the judge held against, I was acting for the mother. I felt it was tough because in a fact finding that she raised domestic abuse, it wasn't believed. And even though the father smashed the television on the child's 6th birthday and threw a Hoover about, and remember the issues, and a neighbour saw her. But anyway, judge didn't actually accept that he'd done anything wrong. I've no idea why. But all 4 children, and my personal view was they had been aligned with the mother because the father then formed a new relationship with another woman, took them all to her house on the first time they went for contact with him. And she was saying to the judge, and the judge didn't accept any of this. And it was, I'm not saying we weren't running a winning case, but I just understood it, why all 4 children didn't want to see him because they were totally aligned with her. Because it wasn't the smartest thing to do. It was crass. He'd taken them all for contact to, he was having a relationship with another woman in a village. They all lived very close to each other, hadn't told her. They were embarrassed, I think, and sort of humiliated. It was their friends at school. She was a mother, so it was just a bad situation. And to me, they were aligned children. They saw the mother weeping and she couldn't, she was criticised for the fact that she was crying a lot. But you can see why a child would be aligned. So it can't be attachment, affinity, or alignment. I'm sorry I'm taking a bit of time because this is so important.
It is important.
So you've got to rule those out. And so there could be domestic abuse. There could be very good reasons why the child doesn't want to go to contact. And then number 3, has the parents who the children are with, let's call it the mother here, has she engaged in behaviours that have directly or indirectly impacted on the child, leading to this reluctance, refusal, resistance to engage with the other parent? So has there been really, I think we're talking about psychological manipulation.
Yeah.
So there's a big old hurdle there, if you can see, to get through that. Yeah. They don't think there are many cases of this. So, yeah. There's a lot.
That's really interesting. Yeah, a lot of information, but it's interesting to see that a lot of this terminology is so subjective. So there's going to be a lot of interpretation left with the courts to see whether, what is, for example, that last point you mentioned around the alienating behaviors, is talking ill about their father in this context, is that considered alienating, or would they have to be saying particularly vile things, or is it how frequently they do it? All of that is going to be very much left to interpretation. It's not a recipe that you can definitely count on.
Well, I'm going to throw something else at you that very recent, I think it was just in the last week, there was some research commissioned, trying to think who it was by, it'll come to me, but it's a research commission, and it's by a campaigning organisation who are campaigning about alienation. So I could kind of see why they commissioned this. But this research was of 1,000 separated parents. So parents who'd gone through a separation in the last few years, and they were asked the question whether they had the other parent had engaged in alienating behaviours, and almost 40% said yes to that.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You can see that you can see how there's a real imbalance. And then it was even higher when certain things were set out to them. They said, oh, yeah, actually, we recognise that. So I think and then there was some research with 18 to 24-year-olds who'd grown up and and asked 1,000 of them, did you witness this? And it was a very high, it might have been 80% say witnessed alienating parents by one or other of parents.
Yeah.
You can position that research and say that happens, but then does that result in alienation? And then even in that research, or the adults that were told, it's quite interesting that 50% of separated parents, the child was having no contact with the other parent. We should never forget that.
Just that happens a lot.
That. We always think about the children. So there are a lot of parents who are having no contact with it, just growing up with either their father. Children are growing up with just their father or their mother, not seeing the other parent at all. So all of those people, who knows what's going on there? They're not spending time with the other parent. That's about 50%.
Yeah, and so it's interesting because, as I said earlier on, parental alienation is very controversial because there's been claims that it's being used as a weapon for perpetrators of domestic abuse to then get back at the victim survivor who is trying to protect their children effectively. Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit more about the controversy around that and the different arguments?
Well, I think that is very much recognised by the courts and by CAFCAS. And I've also looked at the CAFCAS guidelines about children's resistance or refusal to spending time with the parent. It's a long piece of guidance to family court advisors who were doing the reports. And so they're aware that alienation or alienating behaviours are raised as a tactic when a party is raising domestic abuse. And I just see that all the time. It almost seems routine. It almost seems farcical because, as I say, the first thing you say is, but the child's going to see you. So why would you be saying they're being alienated? Yeah. But the fact is, there is evidence, there's domestic abuse, and that's relevant. I do think that, there needs to be really, really clear thinking. And what the Family Justice Council report is saying is the way to deal with this is as follows. You must first deal with the domestic abuse allegations. Okay. You don't go. And they also say there is no equivalence to domestic abuse, which is a criminal matter, and allegations of alienating behaviour. I think that's quite controversial, actually, because there are people who are saying there should be an equivalence. If someone is alienating a child, that's a very serious thing. But Family Justice Council is saying there's no equivalence to the two. One is a criminal matter and
Yeah.
one is an allegation raised in a civil family proceeding. So I want to make that clear. That is what the Family Justice Council is saying.
Yeah.
And then they're very careful to say that sometimes there are allegations of domestic abuse and they are not found, and they are found to be false. But even so, you still have to prove that there's not affinity, alignment, attachment. You still have to prove that it's, so you still have to those texts. So it is recognised that it is a tactic when domestic abuse is raised. I had a case, it was at least 3 years, it'll probably come back, where I was acting for the mother. She raised domestic abuse and the father then raised alienation. And we had a fact finding where he had 5 allegations. They were absolutely ridiculous. It was so blatantly nonsense. But we had, and it was during COVID, so it was all done online, and it was very, very, very stressful for the mother because
I can imagine.
She didn't know what the court would decide. She agreed to supervised contact while that was being investigated. It took its time. All of her allegations were found proved. All of his were found to be untrue. But he still then persisted. He wanted more reports. It was incredibly stressful. And, in the end, then there was a welfare hearing, there were reports, and then he wanted another specialist, and that was an inappropriate expert, and we had to appeal that. And in fact, that person then stepped away because they were wholly inappropriate. Because what I find is people will say, oh, well, there's been alienation. And I want this expert. And that expert is an interested party, and this is a big area. And the case that I was quoting earlier, Lord Macfarlane said, I want this all looked at in the status of experts, because basically anyone can call themselves a psychologist. They don't have to be linked to a governing body, etc., etc. So this is an area where they have now given guidelines about experts. So I know I've strayed, but domestic abuse allegations can trigger alienation allegations. And also, I think we should also remember that people can commit domestic abuse and alienate the child. Please do not forget that cohort.
Yeah,
okay,
that's true as well.
You can have a double effect. You can have someone who is abusing you and alienating the children. And I think that is not discussed.
That's a good point. And so how does the court take into account the voice of the child in this kind of context? You've got a child who's saying, I don't want to go see mom or dad. You've got, of course, the parent who's fighting that. Is it the rights of the parents versus the voice of the child? And how do you deal with the potential influence or manipulation that might sit behind the child's words?
Thank you for raising that, because I think that's the central issue. It's really where we should start and where we should finish. And again, the Family Justice Council guidelines are saying, remember, we're here to deal with the child's interests. So, for example, a child may be saying they don't want to see a parent, and that is a very damaging thing. If they grow up and they don't see a parent, that can affect them and have lifelong effects. And if that parent very much wants to see them, but they are, let's say, aligned, there aren't no alienating factors, then I feel so sorry for the mother or the father who has that child, because they don't need all of these allegations. You're alienating the child. That may not be happening. And I've also seen adults who, given Families Need Fathers meeting, and they had 2 sisters, and they came to explain, we just didn't want to see our dad. We don't really know why. It was nothing our mother was doing. Now we do see our dad. And I think that it was profound. And they couldn't really say, we just like being out in our rooms. And that is the voice of the child. And the voice of the child, I don't want to be too controversial, but I feel it's being lost. The courts, they're so above their head are these domestic abuse, parental, all these things flying around them, and they're just a child. And that can be so distressing for an adult to hear that there isn't any particular reason. It's just how it is, or they've got this belief. And I just that takes a lot for a parent to think, I'm the adult, maybe I have to step back, maybe I have to wait for a while. I have had parents who've walked away because they love their child so much and don't want to put their child through more.
Yeah, and that's the challenge even for the court, right? Is, how much do you want to force this child to go see a parent that they don't want to see? And actually, in a way, whether they've been manipulated into feeling that way or not, they're still feeling that way. And are you going to force them to do it? It must be a very difficult debate for the judge.
I think these are the cases where judicial consistency is really important. So they know they have to stick with the case. And I kind of feel you go back to them and they're like, oh, this case, it's their heart sink case where they hoped so much that things would go. They made an order. It hasn't worked. It's come back to them. And I have some compassion for those judges who are really trying to do their best. And they are very vexed. A lot of money can be spent. And sometimes you think all of that money's been spent and these children, the parents are now financially affected by that. These are the most difficult cases. And of course, private law children cases come behind care cases. So the care case would go in, and understandably, because the child's in care, big decisions have to be made. So there may be these huge delays, and that's why it doesn't really work, this system. So it can be years of litigation and no happy ending. I was involved in a case last year where I'm going to say, sorry, carry on. Yeah, carry on. I digress.
I'm interested in the case. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I was in a case where father hadn't seen his children for 6 months, and we pushed on, we kept going back. And the guardian was appointed. We had quite an active judge who grasped it. We had a hearing. The mother was fully heard. I was acting for the father. She was fully heard to take allegations. The local authority did reports. And the children were saying things like, our dad's a robber, our dad's a criminal. And obviously he was none of those things. So it was actually easy to find those alienating behaviours, and she was alienating him. And then she came to court very defiant about things and actually would say in court, and none of these things were true. And so rather boldly, she was defying the court in all sorts of ways, and said to the judge, okay, so what we think is the judge, we had a report with the guardian saying the children, that they should be transferred from the mother's care to the father's, because she was so defiant and breaching orders, wouldn't let him see them. There was no good reason, and he'd been checked, and he previously had them in his care, was a good dad, and other issues too. And so I said, okay, so this is what we think we'll do. They should be removed from after school. So he'll go and collect them. We need an order that she's not to attend. The headmistress is to hand them over. And I remember thinking, I hope this works, because transfers of residence are quite big things. And Paul had been writing letters in support of the mother, because she'd been telling them all these things. This has happened, and they were fake. They were untrue and have been found to be untrue. The transfer of residence, he went there, and one of the younger child did sort of scream and shout, and then they went home, and then within a week or so they were completely happy, and then saying their life was 10 out of 10, and that case carried on. So you can do it. You have to be really persistent, and if you've got to get those findings of alienating behaviour, you've got to go through jump through the hoops. And I sort of reflect on that case, and they are still with him, and they're happy, and it's all fine. She's just having supervised contact because she carried on being very, very difficult. So they see her, and it's very hard for him because he would like them to spend more time with her. But unfortunately, she carries on her narrative. He's a robber, he's a villain.
So that's actually quite an interesting point around the kind of long-term, continued conflict that can come from this. So, in this kind of scenario, when one parent has brought those kind of claims to the court, if they've been dismissed, can they be raised again a few years later, or does that seal the deal and the children stay with whoever it was decided?
That's a tricky thing with children, isn't it? Because no order is ever final. Although courts are increasingly say you need permission to come back to court, because different things do happen in children's lives. New evidence does come. You'd have to get, if you wanted to reopen a fact finding here, you'd have to get permission for that.
Yeah.
But you can raise things at a new time. And that's why I think then people can get so tired and exhausted by litigation. And that's why the courts are imposing these permission orders. So you have to get permission to come back. And just to
avoid that kind of ongoing. Yeah.
The structure of this, if you raise the issue of alienating behaviours, once you've ruled out that it's domestic abuse, then the court will have a fact finding about that and decide if there have been alienating behaviours, and then then there would be the welfare aspect, and that would be a welfare report, and it all takes a long time. And all the time, these behaviours are continuing. That's the worst thing. That's
the worst part, and they're being torn apart. And so has there been any research that you know of around the long-term effects of these kind of claims on children and on the parents themselves?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, these are adverse childhood experiences, and the effect on mental health is very high. And that research that I was talking about earlier, that showed, well, obviously there's effect of the mental health on the parent. They call them targeted parent, the parent who is not able to see the child. There is a significant mental health effect on them. But yeah, there's a mental health effect on children because these are adverse childhood experiences. If you grow up without the care and the love of most children love their parents. I've done so many care cases, and it's fact that child has been hit by a parent, that child has been ill-treated, burned with cigarettes. I'm not talking about private law, I'm talking about care cases that I've done. Yeah. And usually the child might be 7 and say, I want to live with mummy. And they've been burned by a cigarette because they love their parents. So that's just putting that out there, that most children, whatever is said about their parent, most children do love their parent. They may not be able to express that because it's part of them. That's their genetic inheritance. But these things are complex, and not all parents, unfortunately, do the right thing for their children or care about their children. And obviously, if you are trying to, I think there's a division. People they will badmouth the other parent, and they just don't mean it because we're not saints. Let's just get that out there. But I think it's a sustained element of trying to eliminate the other parent from the child's life. Yeah. That's emotional harm, clearly, isn't it? Yeah. It's psychological, emotional harm. And that will have an effect on the child. And there is research to confirm that. Yeah. And you are doing something if you do that.
And there's also a lot of research that shows that mistreating your co-parent is a way of abusing your children as well. Because when you behave that way, you're hurting your children. So it's not just between you and the co-parent. The kids are right in the middle of it.
Yeah. I mean, we're the adults. We're the adults. They are the adults. And there needs to be a step back. And sometimes we have to do things we don't want to do. And if you are separated, and I didn't really get to, and there's a lot of guidance on podcasts, they actually say, looking at it, that these behaviours, alienating behaviours, may be due to a misplaced anger at the other parent. It's still there, and the one parent's trying to get at the other parent. And so if there can be some self-awareness, if people are behaving like this, then maybe step back, and you yourself, father, mother, and it's not gender specific. I really want to emphasize that. I've had so many mothers approach me to say, I'm unable to see my child who's living with a father. Mm-hmm. What can I do? So please understand, more children live with their mothers. So it looks like mothers might be more the alienating party, but that's only because more children live with their mothers. But fathers do this too, unfortunately. Yeah.
Just one last question that I was thinking about is, when you have families with several children and only some of them or one of them is refusing to go see the other parent, how does the court deal with that? Would they allow the children to have different visitation arrangements, or do they try to keep them together?
It's not a start point. I mean, a start point would the children should all go together, but that's a great question, because that can happen. Sometimes it's an older child, and they can be treated separately. Often the courts might say, Jane and John, Jane's 12, she doesn't want to go, and John's 8 and he really wants to go and see his dad. And Jane is always encouraged and invited to attend with John, but he might have a different arrangement. They're different ages. One is 6, one is 12. And, as children get a bit older, again, that may be nothing really to do with the dad. It's just that she's starting to want to spend more time with her friends, doesn't want to go, every second weekend, maybe just wants to go once a month. And that is very hurtful. And maybe it's not right. So it's a difficult decision, but it may be that that older child does have a different arrangement.
Yeah.
Cases.
Do you think it would be a counter argument to any claims of parental alienation if one of the children is still willing to go?
Yeah, I think so. It would be, I think, it's a very, very perceptive point, because there are definitely cases of alienating behaviours, but I think there is a huge category of cases where the other parent they're labelling a parent as alienating and they're not being alienating at all.
Yeah.
And I don't know how we break through. Yeah, it's almost as if you need to, and often you'll get an expert come in and said the family needs to go to family therapy. And the trouble is you can't make people go to therapy.
Yeah. Or speak at therapy.
Sorry?
Yeah. Or speak at therapy. You could make them physically go, but not actually participate. They need to be involved.
Another very perceptive point, that people can say they're going to do something, but they don't really engage. It doesn't matter how many courses you give people. Obviously they are sent to courses by the court. They don't want to listen. And that's a dilemma.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Joanna. This is such an interesting conversation, and really today with so many different facets to it. Where can people find you and contact you if they want to find out more, if they have any questions?
Okay, my business is Family Law Cafe. I set it up because of the complexity of family law. It's not one size fits all. So you can just find us on social media. You can go to our website. We're familylawcafe.co.uk. If you want to email us, info@familylawcafe.co.uk. Just look on Instagram or LinkedIn or Twitter or X or whatever it's called. And we're on each platform, and we're very accessible. Call in 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. We're here, and we'll always give you an initial consultation, see if we can help, and if we're for you, we'd love to help you, and if we're not, then we wish you well in any event.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Joanna. Have a lovely day.
Thank you, Chloe. Very grateful.